Well, to catch everybody up on the same page, last week we talked a little bit just about what happens when you go through either personal struggles as a host or you and your C group are going through a little bit of a difficult time and the resources that you have available because we don't want anybody to feel like that you're going at this alone. And I know that we just launched really the coaching program last year, and we had some hits and some misses with it. And we're going to be looking to continue to improve that. Chris has already sent you all an email out if you are a host about, the summer, fall, early fall, late summer break, and also the C group kind of get together time that we're going to have around then in a training. And it's, I say this for as much of the people watching as I do to you because you're obviously already here, but I encourage you to take advantage of that group time. It's a good time to hear the vision that the church has for community groups and just rejuvenate and catch up with other C group facilitators then. So last week we talked about the resources that you have available, coaches, and viewing coaches as just partners in this, people to talk to, strategize with, to pray for you, to share the good things that are going on with your group and the struggles that your group are having. And then not only that you have a lot of great pastors as resources to you. If you have a couple that's going through a hard time, if you need some more strategizing help, to reach out to them if you need any more help or encouragement. So there's lots of options available. Today we're going to transition to a little bit of a different topic. Last week we got a little bit heavier as we went on and we talked about the potential struggles you could run into. But today we're talking about something that I get really excited about, and that is, the ministry outreach opportunities with community groups and multiplication of community groups. And I know that can give us a little apprehension, but it really is just a great and exciting thing. It's funny. I work at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I think most people know that, but most people probably don't have a good idea at what I do at Fish and Wildlife, and it's always a struggle for me because there's no easy explanation. I kind of wind up having my hands in a whole lot of different projects at any given time, doing a whole lot of various roles in those projects. But over the years, one duty that has increasingly fallen to me is dealing with aquatic nuisance species in the state. And the short version of that, I'm going to get a little nerdy on you this morning, but the short version of that is that aquatic nuisance species are species that are not native to Kentucky, that somehow they have found their way over there through the pet trade, through aquaculture, whatever, and they've got into our native waters and they have multiplied out of control. And so a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of money gets spent on dealing with that insane multiplication. And so I know that we get some apprehension about multiplying in our community groups, a little nervousness about what to do when that happens. So I want to give you an image to think of that's a little easier on your head and your concerns when you're talking about multiplication. This is a video I took below Barkley Dam of an aquatic nuisance species that is out of control. So I just want to show it real quick, and I want you to soak it in all its glory. I'm going to turn off the sound so you don't hear the screams of terrified men as this goes on. So I've slowed it down just so you can just soak this in. So literally, they're turning on an electrofishing boat there, and keep in your head, you're probably seeing less than 5% of what's under the water. They had to shut it off. These poor guys are up there with nets. They have no fish in their nets, but they could have sank the boat if they'd have just continued. So one more time, just to get all the glory in there. So they turned on there, and then when they quit jumping, they turned it off. But you can see the number in the boat. This guy over here is my favorite. Wait for him. Boom, look, straight up. And you're talking that's 8-9 feet in the air. So the electrofishing, the current, they jump because of boat motors as well. But this case, we kind of amped them up. But it's safe to say they found their one, right? You know, like these things multiply like there is no tomorrow. So those fish average probably 6 to 10 pounds. But I mean, some of those were pretty thick. I mean, you could see, like, look in comparison to the guy here, and look at the size of that fish. Like, these aren't shad, you know. I mean, these are this big, and lots of boating injuries. A whole lot of things happen with them because of just the size. And boat motors do scare them. They don't jump in that sort of numbers with a boat motor, but they will jump. And so, like I said, you know, we talk about in our church and in our community multiplying the number of people, and species like this come into our water and they multiply in just insane ways. And in the biology world, we call that sort of growth exponential growth. So, like I said, I'm going to go a little nerd on you, and thanks to Reeves every week comes in and he sets up the TV for me, and he sets up the whiteboard. So this is the last week. I said I'm using them both because he's done it every week, and I've never used them all. So with exponential growth, like I said, if you go and you've got time on one axis, and you've got the number of individuals on the other, what happens is a species like this comes in the water, and there's a few of them there. You know, a few of them get introduced. So for a long time, they reproduce at a very, very slow rate, right? They got to find each other. They got to successfully reproduce. It takes a while. But then eventually what happens is as they start multiplying and they get a few more out, this rate of growth changes. And it starts shooting up. And this is what we call exponential growth, because that rate of growth here is kind of slow. But over time, as more individuals come out, that rate of growth increases. It just shoots up. So obviously that can't happen forever, right? Like when you see that number of fish in the water, they got to have something to eat. They've got to have space. So a water body will have what's called the carrying capacity. Come on in. No, you're fine. So you came right in for the science lesson part, so you're good. You're good timing. Well, yeah, you got to catch up. No, you got to catch it up. Everybody will appreciate going, and you can give them a chance to correct my curve because it's bugging me. Oh yeah, it's insane. It's insanity. This is below Barkley Dam. Yeah. Well, it's more a demonstration, and those are kind of, one of those guys is kind of new to it, and we're kind of showing him the issue. So this is kind of trial by fire. Yeah, you get out on the front and stand up there. See, this is Paul Reister. He's a 30-year biologist. Notice how he's driving the boat. Like this, in the middle. Okay, so he knows what's going on. So, exponential growth. Slow initially, takes time, and then as they become established, their rate of growth, their rate of multiplication, those numbers just shoots up. But it can't happen forever. They need food. They need resources. So over time, what happens is each water body has what we call a carrying capacity. It's kind of the number of that species that really that resource can sustain. So if you can kind of imagine that if you take a lake, we'll say Kentucky Lake, it's got this level, this carrying capacity, the maximum number of these fish it can sustain. Well, these fish, they're multiplying so fast, at some point, they overshoot that. They overshoot what the lake can handle. So what happens? Some sort of disease or just resource depletion happens, and they start dying out, and that growth that was so heavy starts tanking. It goes back down. And it'll come back up, but it will oscillate around that carrying capacity, in theory. All right, so you got Kentucky Lake. Now, take an example. Say this is the carrying capacity of Kentucky Lake. Say you have Cumberland, We don't have Asian carp in Lake Cumberland, but say you did, it's a smaller lake. It's less fertile. It can support less of those fish. The carrying capacity is lower. So if that were Asian carp in Lake Cumberland, that capacity would be a lot smaller. So it's pretty easy in a biology example, right? We understand that well. There's only a finite amount of resources out there. At some point, they can't handle that anymore. And it's funny, when we talk about the challenges of C group operation, a lot of times, in our experience, it follows that curve. You know, we talk about sharing and reaching out to people. And in our experience, when we started a new C group, a lot of times we'd hang out in this area for quite a while, right? You start one out, it's maybe a core of just one or two people. Maybe it's 2 families, maybe it's 3 families that are committed, that's saying we're going to do this every week. And a lot of times it takes a while. This growth starts out slow. You're building those relationships. You're setting your vision and your values for your small community group. And you're growing together. You're figuring out how it works. And it takes a while. Well, what I want to encourage you is, I don't know which stage your group is in, or as you think about it, just recognize that initially that's going to take a while. And you may stay in this slow growth period for a while. But I venture to say most times, if you have a healthy group, over time, as your relationships grow, as things get ironed out with you as a group, as you become closer, it's kind of a natural extension that you're going to be talking about your community group to other people. You're going to be sharing about it. Other people are going to hear about it. And this growth, at some point, is slowly going to start to increase. And at some point, you're going to reach the carrying capacity, right? And the carrying capacity for every small group is different. So I'm going to steer away from today giving you some number and saying once you get here, you need to consider multiplying. But I just want you to think about that cycle. Because what happens, and Heather and I have seen it in groups that we've led at our house, is that they grow and all of a sudden we have this explosion of growth and a lot of people come and we feel the pressure. For us, with a lot of young families, it manifested itself in just pure craziness. I mean, one night, we show up to C group, and it looks like this. I want you to hear their screams. So, that's what our C group started to sound like. But you hit this, for us, a lot of times it was the kids. Our size, the carrying capacity of our house, we have a smaller house, and our baseline is 5 people at our house before C groups even starts. I know many of you are similar, if not more than that. So our capacity to have more people, the more young families, honestly, by the time we got to 5 families with kids in our C group, that is what it felt like on a Sunday evening. And we recognized that, okay, we need to consider multiplying. Now, in other instances, it may be something different. You may have a bigger house. Your capacity, you may not have as many kids in your group. You may be able to have 25 adults before you feel like you're hitting into some capacity issues. Again, it can manifest itself in a lot of ways. Maybe it feels crazy purely with the number of kids that are there. Maybe you start to notice that you aren't able to connect with everybody in the C group. As the facilitators, assistant facilitators, hosts, are you able to make those connections? A lot of times when you get a group that size and it stays stagnant, you kind of become closed. You're looking inward And people just feel the weight of like, it's already pretty crazy. I kind of don't want to invite anybody else. And we definitely would experience this when we overshot the number at our house and it felt crazy, especially people who weren't young families had a really difficult time coming over because we had a lot of crazy kids. If you're not used to that anyway, it was overwhelming for us, let alone somebody who doesn't know everybody. Let alone somebody, we had several single people that came to our C group, and it got to the point that to them, they would never say it. They would never say it, but you could tell it was kind of overwhelming to them. So multiplication, as intimidating as it can feel, you'll notice some point if your C group starts to grow where you hit that wave of people don't stick as well anymore. Uh-oh. I saw Pete Wright's windows open, so I hope that he goes back outside to his truck. So as you hit that point, look for those signs. Are you still able to assimilate new people? Does it seem harder for new people to come into your group because they see these just very established connections in this very loud group, and it's harder for people to reach out to them? And then kind of decide, okay, what is it you want to do? What are the next steps to deal with that carrying capacity being reached? So again, long-winded biology example to get you to the point of, just what happens when you get there as a community group. So let's first talk about on the way there. When you're in this stage and you're starting out early on and you're looking for people to invite. First resource I want to bring up is the assimilation team. So Matt Morvay, a lot of his role is to help assimilate new families into the church through a lot of different avenues. One of those obviously is community group, because we see when people come to a community group, when they feel a part of it, when they build that relationship, they tend to stay. They want to be here. So the arm that helps Matt do that for community groups specifically is Barry. So Barry, do you mind just giving us a quick 1 or 2 minute? What?
People are walking out
Oh
like,
no, we got to get soaked to get in there. Barry, do you mind telling us what the plans are right now in terms of C group assimilation?
The assimilation should start.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that so they've got it mic'd. I imagine with the rain, nothing gets heard. But so, yeah, as part of that assimilation program, Barry has 4 or 5 families that he is working with or individuals that he is working with to help him just marry new people who come in with C groups that they think would fit well. So I'm going to guess that has to do with geography, that may have to do with age group or some key people that they think would mesh well with. So those people are going to be, when new people come in, these Buck Run individuals are going to help them say, hey, here's a C group. We recommend you give these people a call. Recognize that's a big hurdle for a new person to call somebody and say, hey, can I come over to your house? That's a big ask. So the second half of that is we're going to be sending out to us as facilitators or hosts names of individuals that may be interested in C groups and saying, hey, will you reach out to them? Now, recognize this is the big picture goal, but there's all sorts of little struggles in between that. And one, like I said, it's awful intimidating. You got to be pretty darn outgoing to call somebody you don't know and say, let me come to your house. So if you get the request from Barry or from one of the other assimilation team, please, try to make sure you reach out to them. Email tends to be really difficult for me personally, so try to do the phone call and leave a voicemail, and use people in your group too. If you've got somebody in your group who's good at that. I know for us, I've talked about the Rexroads a lot. That was a great thing that they did in our community group. Their role was outreach. And they would hound people mercilessly on Sunday mornings when they saw them to come to our group. And so, share that burden. Don't keep it all to yourself. Share that but I encourage you to really try to reach out to those people that are given to you because you're being counted on to do that. Yes. Well, great. That's certainly something to think about. As you talk about expanding and growing your community group, I encourage you to just make sure that you're communicating the purpose of your group. It can become really easy for that to be something that you forget about. And I know that we certainly had stages of that. You know, you get in a routine and you don't always communicate your purpose. So I encourage you, this book has great resources for you, and it's really easy to remember things. You know, we've talked about kind of staying on the path of purpose in this class, and there's some of us that struggle with veering to the left of being too legalistic, of this is the time you got to be here, these are the questions we got to ask, it's got to end exactly that time. But I think the other side that you can fall off that path is that you are not communicating and being intentional with the purpose and saying, look, we meet together to be known, to really know one another, to create community. We meet to be transformed by the gospel and keep the gospel the central part of why you're meeting. And we go to be sent, to reach out to other people and to invite other people to this group. And you know, you can very easily fall off on the other side of the gospel can become absent in this, and it just becomes a meeting and a hangout time that you miss that. So make sure that you can communicate that clearly. And you may steer a little bit differently with each community group. You're going to have that main shared purpose, but you know, for example, the Scots group's going to be a little more outreach minded. Isn't that a lot of their group may be new Christians, whereas some of you may be facilitating groups that have a lot of mature believers, and your focus, the vision you cast for your community group might be just a little bit different. You might focus on having more deep discussion than a group with a lot of new believers would, or a group that's more outreach minded. You might have very basic discussions about what it means to live life as a believer. But by continually and regularly bringing up and communicating clearly that purpose of your group, it's going to help them remember constantly that it's okay for me, because there's a different comfort level if you're a member versus you're a host. It's really easy for us to invite people over to our house. But for somebody else, for me to be like, hey, I've got this cool guy, Barry. Y'all should come over to Barry's house on Sunday night. You know, there's a different level of comfort that I have to invite somebody over to his house without asking him. So communicate that. You can also communicate the importance of, hey, we love for you to invite people. This is an open group. Give us a courtesy heads up so we know somebody's news coming, and we can think about how to make them feel welcome in our home, in our community group. And you can do that. On the same way, when we talk about multiplication and getting to a place that we spawn off a new group, don't let that be a surprise to people. You know, you don't have to bring it up every week, but at least discuss it at some point that the possibility of being sent is out there. So it's not this big surprise when all of a sudden one week you're like, okay, we've got to kick some people out. Like, you know, just don't let it surprise people that it's happening, because you may be thinking in your head, and what I learned the hard way is that I thought it was completely clear at times what was going on, and some people didn't. And when I surprised them, that's when a lot of the struggles happened. So communicate that clearly. And I'm not telling you in terms of outreach you need to hammer in every week, go invite somebody, but just let your people know that it's okay and it's welcome to bring new people in. You know, the bottom line in that is if you keep the purpose of your group gospel-centered and the focus being on the higher purpose of the gospel and what God has called us to, then there isn't as much tied to my personal convenience. And your personal convenience of being in a comfortable group and things being easy doesn't take precedence. Because if it does, you'll never reach out to anybody else, and you will never multiply as a community group. And that's hard. But again, it's just a message that needs to be communicated. I mentioned your book. Your book has a lot of great resources about why, discussing why we need to multiply, why we need to be multiplication minded as community groups, how we recognize that we need to multiply. And I'm going to hit on a few of those things quickly. I'm not going to hit on all of them. But for us, as we seek to make community groups a key function of Buck Run, multiplication of these groups should really be a matter of when and not if. Still, we have over half of our church on Sunday morning doesn't have a community group to go to, or they don't go to a community group. They may have one, but they may not attend. And so we've got a fertile ground right here to get people involved. And we've transitioned. We're not a little church anymore, and so people can easily get lost if they're not being invited in community group. Heather and I talk about it all the time that we used to at the old building. I felt like anybody, almost anybody's face I recognized. Even if I didn't know them, I at least recognized them. And now, since we've been in this building, I see young families that I've never seen before regularly. And I'm like, I would at least recognize their face. There's lots of opportunity, new people just coming within these walls. You laughing at me? Yeah, I know. We've moved on. We've moved on. But it's going to be an essential part of who we are, and it's an outreach opportunity in the community as well. The other thing is, as our community groups age, Heather and I saw this with our groups, you either grow or you die. You're either expanding members, new people are coming in, or you become stagnant and you turn closed the more you get to know each other. I mean, it really goes one or the other, and it really boils down to the convenience and the comfort level. Are you fostering that? And I can think of times when myself as a facilitator and a host, that when I did not emphasize that, the group could stagnate. Like, it mattered, like what I said and how I encouraged that and the environment that we fostered in that. New groups tend to assimilate new people better. Well, we talked about this growth phase. You tend to be really open when you're small to inviting new people because you really want them and you're really excited about new people coming, and you make a big deal out of it. You have a game night when they come. You do all sorts of things. But as you hit this huge growth phase and people kind of become, well, it's easy to go sit in this corner of the Wilkes house and talk to these same people each week. And I like the expression "fat cats don't hunt." You kind of lose the desire for the chase there, and it's easy to turn closed in that. New groups really foster that culture of multiplication. We see multiplication woven into every aspect of Jesus' ministry, reaching out to people, discipling others. As believers, we're called that one-on-one discipleship level, and that goes for our C groups as well. Sometimes you just feel like the multiplication on the C group level seems like really, really difficult. And I think part of that is because we own it a little more as facilitators and hosts, right? And there's a little bit of disappointment to our people and a little bit of a sense of loss when we talk about needing to split up a group and start another one, and we don't get to see some people every week. And there's a real feeling of loss with that people really struggle with. And I would just equate it to this way. Sometimes we tend to grumble and be like, okay, the pastors really want us to multiply C groups. I guess we got to find a way to do that. Just imagine if that was the attitude that we took with Overland Church. Like, oh, we're sending our best out to Colorado. I guess that's what they want us to do. If that would just be an awful attitude to have. And that's the one that we have to avoid at the C group level, because we're the facilitators. We set the tone for the attitude of our group. And people are going to grumble. People are going to feel like that at some level. So encourage that multiplication. Talk about it. It's a good thing. It's a great thing. Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, there's some loss and heartache in it, but the kingdom reward for that is amazing. And just thinking of, again, using Overland as a church as an example, obviously we're not starting a new church with this, but just the joy and the blessing that it comes of watching and hearing about how the Lord is using, so many of our best and brightest families from Buck Run over there. So too, when you multiply C groups, I encourage you to look at it that way. You are sending out the best families in your C group to go out and to start just sharing the Lord in a different way and discipling others in a different way. And it's hard, but the results are worth it. What we've already talked about, as your group gains size, we become a lot less efficient. New groups means more fellowship. It means better fellowship. It's the opportunity to just really get to know each other better. I talked about the carrying capacity of a group, and for some groups that's small. Like for us in a smaller house with a lot of kids, 5 families winds up being like 15 adults and, another 15 to 18 kids. So in a 1,400 square foot house, that's a whole lot of people, and it feels crazier. Maybe you've got a bigger house. Maybe you've got kids there or not, but your capacity before you get there is a little different. But still, I'd say if you get up to a point where you've got about 25 adults in a group, I think that's usually when it's getting very, very difficult to have just one-on-one conversations and really make sure nobody gets lost. You've kind of surpassed the small group by that point. So the carrying capacity is different, but really you do hit that ceiling quickly. And finally, starting new groups gives the opportunity for new leaders to develop. And I'm sure that you all have seen the personal growth in your walk with the Lord and the challenges that have come with ministering through hosting or facilitating small community groups. But there's a lot of spiritual growth that occurs in that, and there's a lot of blessing in that, just getting the opportunity to pour into other people's lives. And, encouraging that new growth may mean encouraging some people to take the next step and step up into more of a leadership role. It's a great opportunity. As we start thinking about multiplication, I just want to share with you kind of the way that we have done it at our community group. Interestingly, the way that we did it, as I looked through the book, it was very similar to the way that they had laid it out. And I'll tell you the truth, that sometimes it worked out great. Sometimes there were more hurdles and it was a little more difficult. But I think by this point I mentioned last week that we probably, over our 7 years, and this is no mark to aim for because we kind of cheated because we were, doing community groups before everybody else was. So we had a lot more people coming into ours. We were more well-known. And so, like I said, we hit that growth a lot sooner because we were really the only one initially. But I think we spawned 3 or 4 new groups off of ours. Most of them did very well. One of them really struggled early on, and we kind of wound up coming back together a year or so later just because the right mix didn't happen. As they started out, they lost some key families to life changes, and so, that one was a struggle. Basically, our path was we talked about multiplying a lot when we got here. When we got really close to knowing that as a group we were maxing out our space and our ability to do community well, we went ahead and started talking about it a lot. And honestly, most of the time when we got there, everybody else kind of noticed it too. Like, okay, yeah, we're pretty much trashing their house every night, and there's a lot of us going on. It's hard to have discussion. It's hard to talk to everybody. People started feeling it, which is a good thing because, again, it wasn't a surprise. They kind of saw it coming. We'd been talking about it, and we talked about it for 6 to 7 months beforehand. So it became really clear that this is something we're going to need to consider doing. So the next thing that we did is we very prayerfully considered, and I consulted with, this was before the C group coaches, so I would consult with the pastors, and that would give me good feedback, and it give me some confidence and some help of just saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking, what do you think? And I would encourage you to use the coaches that way too, and say, hey, just lend an ear to us, come over to dinner, let's just talk about it. We're thinking about multiplying. You know people well at this church too, so where do you think they would fit in well? So then we would think about who we'd like to ask to be the new host or new facilitator. Some cases that was different people. Sometimes the host was different than the facilitator. Sometimes they were one and the same. And we would go to that individual or that family and just ask them. And that would be the first tip, is that make sure that you're not telling people to do things. Just suggest, ask their interest, tell them you've been thinking about it, and give them time to mull it over. Say, hey, would you consider doing this? I really think there's a great opportunity for you to host or facilitate a C group. We're reaching max capacity. Can you keep this to yourself at this point? But just ask them. And in that, the second point is really try to be very strategic with who you communicate this with and how. Because we found out sometimes that if word got out that we were for sure multiplying soon, there came a kind of panic of like, I better find a home soon or else I'm going to get booted out somewhere I don't want to be. So kind of be very cognizant of who you communicate what information with. Ask that new facilitator or host if this is something they'd like to do. And if it is, then say, okay, if you'd like to do that, let's start talking some strategy between the two of us and think about how we can make this happen. And so then the second step is to think about some very solid individuals or families that are committed to community group that could go be an assistant facilitator or just be there every Sunday. We mentioned sending out the best and the brightest, and if your community group reaches that level where it's time to start a new one, be thinking about that. Also be strategic with geography. If you've got somebody that's in the Lexington area and they've been driving 20 minutes to Frankfort for your C group, think about, okay, could you start one at your home in Lexington? And then who do you take with you? So you've got a great resource now. And two, don't feel limited to your own community group. Start with maybe a facilitator or a host that people know, but then consider reaching out elsewhere in the church if they need assistant facilitators or if they need someone else in a geographical area that's not near you, and ask, hey, would you be willing to just commit to being in this new community group? And I think that commitment level is very, very important. What we learned is when we multiplied C groups, the newest group always had the most difficulty getting through here, this new growth phase. Because their house isn't known about. You know how it is. If you've got a C group that regularly has 15 people, you maybe have 25 people that you might consider in your community group, but maybe only 10 to 15 come on any given night. So a lot of those periphery people, they're probably going to show up back at your house, not the new group. So try to give some rock solid people to start off early and to make sure that they're gonna be there week in and week out. And we found it was most successful when we kind of stack the deck in the new group's favor. Something will always happen. And again, keep that communication loop somewhat tight. You don't want to be keeping a huge secret here, but like I said, when we struggled several times with kind of panic breaking out of somebody not knowing where they're going to go or what's going on. But when you've got that facilitator set up and when you've got your core families, then go ahead and bring it to the attention of the rest of your group and say, hey, we're looking at going ahead and multiplying. Some families have volunteered to go to this new group. And again, you're asking people their interest. You're thinking about who gets along really well, who pairs and works really well together, and who has the maturity to go do that. And then say, this is what we're looking at doing. We've asked some families to go this direction or that. If you have any concerns, please come talk to us. And we want to make sure that we find the place that feels comfortable for you and set a new launch date to give it a go. For us, we also initially tried to lessen that feeling of loss than saying like, okay, we're going to try to come together as two community groups every 6 months or so, or every quarter, or whatever you want to do, to hang out and get to know each other. Eventually, that inevitably kind of fell apart on its own, but at least, starting that out gave people some sense, kind of diminished that sense of loss of like, well, I'm never going to see Barry anymore because, I'm always on this side of the sanctuary and he's on this side, and we never see each other on Sunday mornings. That's hard. That's hard. But to say we're going to make some intentions to get back together as a bigger group. There were some struggles that we had from time to time, and I emphasize communication so much because when we had an issue, it was usually my drop ball on the communication end, where I ask somebody to, hey, would you be an assistant facilitator for the new group? And they said, well, we really felt like that was going to be us at your group. And it was very hard, and it hurt their feelings, and a lot of that was on me. That was my fault for not communicating with them, my intentions and my thought process in doing that. And it wound out working out amazing. They were the best assistant facilitators that new group could ask for, and that new group was even way more successful as a C group than even the one that stayed at our house that we facilitated. And they went on to spawn multiple community groups from them. And a big part of that was that family that, was just struggling to go ahead and make that change. And again, a lot of that was on me and the drop to communication. But be prayerful in all of this and really go slow, be conscious of people's feelings and thought over it. But always circle back to purpose. Circle back to the purpose of these groups, to be known, to be transformed, and to be sent, and put the gospel above. Foster a community culture that puts the gospel above the personal comfort level of you and your group. And that is the best thing that you can do as you go through the struggles and the joys of multiplying and sending out. So before we wrap up, does anybody have any questions, or have you tried to multiply yourselves? I know several of you have, or have been spawned off from another group about what went well or what didn't go well that you learned from it. Yeah, that's a great point. And I keep going back to the known, transformed, and sent because, man, I love it. It explains it so well. That priority in those community groups is to start off being known, being transformed by the gospel, and to encourage people that, we hope that this multiplication happens, but we're not forcing it. We're waiting. We're spending time in community together. And that's a great point. You don't want to just jump that gun too early. And I know I can't quit with my biology examples, but, just hold off till you get there. Don't feel forced. Don't feel like if you multiply or not is the hinge of success on your group. We talked about our success early on. It's the deepening of the spiritual relationships. It's the deepening of community. This is one way it happens, but again, I say we multiplied a lot, but we cheated, right? We were the first ones, so it came a lot easier for us, and we went a lot faster. It's a little different now, but you also have way more resources in that, and that you don't feel like you have to completely cut your group in half. And both of you, that's the last thing you want, right? Is that if you're too small when you multiply, that you don't have enough people for really either group. But that's a very good point. Any other thoughts? Yeah, and that's a reality. I mean, and that's okay. But to me, I love the model of our church. The strength of it is that you get your community time through community groups. You get, the central act of worship through the preaching on Sunday mornings. You get your in-depth study time in Sunday school. The difficulty is if you skip out on a part of that, you miss a big part of being a community of believers, and that's difficult. So I do think you're right. Some people aren't going to, yeah, regularly. I would consider two options, and what I've done on multiple occasions is, one, I've gone to periphery people and say, I need you. I need you to not be a periphery person. Say, like, look, we've got a need. We're at capacity. We love you guys, and I'm asking you to take the next priority step here. Will you commit to being here more often if we count you as a core member? I think that's one avenue. The second is to consider reaching outside your community group and getting another core family to help with that. And there's a different comfort level with every facilitator. I mean, after we'd been hosts and facilitators for a long time, we weren't that self-conscious about it. So if one other family came to our house every Sunday and we had community in that, we were confident in that, we were okay with that for a longer time. A new host and facilitator, it may be difficult. And we've had, and secondly, if you mess up, it's okay. If it doesn't work out and some new community groups won't work out, it's okay. You can go back to being a big group. You can say, we tried it. You can give it an experimental period. And we've had families that have run into that, and that's all right. And the last thing I want is that people feel like they have to multiply. They work hard to try it, and then they struggle for a year because they're trying to do it, but nobody's showing up, and they're frustrated. That's all right. It's not a reflection on you as a host. It's not a reflection on you as a facilitator. You went out there, you prayerfully considered it, and you gave it a try, and it was a struggle. So come back into community with another group, with the group you're in. Get refreshed, get excited again, and when the time is right, try it again. But don't feel like it's part of the success of your group. We're about to run out of time, so one last thing. A little bit of a different thing going on for the next 2 weeks. We're in a mini cycle of Sunday school classes, so we're going to have basically double one-shots, all right? They're going to be 2-week classes. So you got 4 options. There's 2 women's classes. One is with D'Amica Jones, Sisters Stand Through a Study in Jude. There's another one with Marcia Aristia, Making Your Home a Safe Haven. Those are the 2 women's groups. There's 2 general groups, one with Daniel Moore, Living with Death in Mind, and another taught by Morvay, Loving Your Neighbor. So consider that. They're all really good ones. But remember, they're all up on YouTube. You can go catch another one. I encourage you to get out there and listen to somebody you haven't got to hear teach, that you haven't gone to before. There's a lot of safety in just going to the sanctuary and that. Go hear somebody new. But again, I'm preaching to the choir. I mean, you guys are here in the community group class that's the small class. So I really appreciate you all, your commitment, your desire to learn more about community groups, to do it better. It's an essential part of our church, living in community together, and I'm so thankful for you doing it, and I'm excited to see and hear about the growth stories that you have. And if you have any questions, I love to talk about community groups. So does Heather, so does Barry, a lot of us do. Just come talk. I enjoy talking the strategy of it. So with that, let me close us in prayer before you lose your seats in the sanctuary. Pray, Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us today. Thank you for this time to just sit together for 6 weeks and talk about what it means to live in gospel community, Lord. I ask that you would just help us to be grace-filled in that, to love people, to even when the little hiccups arise, to just face them with joy, and just to give grace to ourselves when we mess up. And I thank you so much for the blessing of being used by you, for the blessing of Christian community, and just what it has meant to my life, to the life of my family. And just help us as facilitators, as hosts, to prayerfully consider the thoughts and actions that we have, and to continually look out to bring others into community, first and foremost into community with you. I thank you for all that you do and how much you love and care for us. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.